Hello, and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hollie, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or search desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to this week's podcast. I'm really excited for this topic. It's a little different. We haven't done something like this yet, but we are going to be talking all about supporting yourself in the fourth trimester. And so this is this really little newborn phase. And so whether you are pregnant and listening to this, whether you just had a newborn and are listening to this, or whether you have a bestie who's just had a newborn who needs to listen to this, I'm really excited to dive into today's topic. And I have a guest who also loves talking about this postpartum period, Hollie, here with me today. And I'm going to let her share a little bit about herself before we jump into today's conversation.
Yeah,
Welcome.
thanks for having me. I'm excited. My name is Hollie Hauptly. I am the owner and CEO of Birth Boot Camp, and we're all about preparing couples and new parents for pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. I have recently, just in the last 2 years, that's kind of when I really became passionate about like this fourth trimester. Before that, it was mainly focusing on the birth, but I'm like, oh, the birth is one day. The postpartum lasts a lot longer than that.
Yes.
So yeah, I got into birth work almost 15 years ago after I had my first. His birth was awesome. It changed my life in a lot of really awesome, really good ways. And I've been doing it ever since then. And so just that's kind of what I live, eat, and breathe, is just helping expecting parents. Because I realized that so many people have so much trauma surrounding their birth and postpartum. And I'm like, I feel like it should be the complete opposite.
Mm-hmm.
It should be like one of the best days of your life that you're going to remember for forever. You know, we always think of like, oh, our wedding and then the day we give birth. Like those are the most important days that we always remember. And so that's kind of my goal, is to help make it so that it's a better experience for more people. So
I love
yeah.
that. And I love that shift into recognizing that while birth is important, right? So is
Mm-hmm.
that immediate time after, though, that like beginning of parenting, right? I mean, birth is that
Right.
transition, you
Yeah.
know, and we want you to be supported however your baby kind of comes into the world. But those early months are so important for bonding and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
shifting into that parenting identity. And I don't know, so many things are happening, and it's such a vulnerable time and such a disrespected time in our
Yes.
culture, right? Like
Yes.
we don't give parents the space and
Mm-hmm.
they need. And that's this topic today of like supporting yourself, and what does that even look like, and what does that mean? So I think maybe just starting with why? Like, why do we need to think about how we support ourselves and what's happening in this fourth trimester, which is the first 3 months of baby's life, more or
Yes.
less, just to define that for
Yes.
folks.
I think that that's great to define that, because we talk about this postpartum, but most people think postpartum, oh, the first 6 weeks, right? But it's
Hmm.
actually an extended amount of time.
I'm going to be honest, though, Hollie, I kind of like the people that say postpartum is forever. So then I
Yes.
can blame things now, 6 years
Uh-huh.
out from my youngest being born, and be like, I mean, I'm still postpartum. Can
Yes.
I
Well,
have a
I
postpartum
recently,
doula, please?
yes, just this past, oh, I don't even think it's been a year. I think just in the last few months, there is a doctor who is now saying, he's like, your body and just everything about it, you're still postpartum, even for the first 10 years. And so that's what I said. I was like, so I'm still postpartum.
I love that. I love that.
So yeah, I think we definitely don't give it the credit, but it really does. I think that that fourth trimester really sets us up for the long duration of parenting. Because like I said, there can be some trauma, but if you can have a really great postpartum, like it's going to be, there's so much going on physically, mentally, emotionally for both partners. But if we can help make that to be a better experience, like that's just going to set us up for parenting down the road.
Yeah.
And it really does. It all starts with, a lot of people don't realize how much your birth can affect your postpartum. And so that's why I love talking about the birth, because that really is that starting point. And then jumping into that fourth trimester of it can affect your health for years to come, physically, mentally, emotionally, all of it. And I really think we need to see a lot more preparation for that time period. Most people go into it just like, I'm going to wing it. They don't know what to expect for themselves, for their physical recovery, what that's going to look like, what they're going to need for that. They don't know a lot about like how to feed their baby, whatever that looks like. They don't understand what normal newborn behavior is. So I think that that's like the first step is during pregnancy is learning about all of those things so that we can have realistic expectations of ourselves and our babies. Because in that, I think for me with my first, I had no idea what I was getting into. I think that that's what most people say.
Yes.
I thought it was going to be like easy. I had an early childhood certification, taught in public schools for a long time. And I was like, oh, piece of cake. I've worked with tons of infants. I babysat, no big deal. The baby part wasn't too hard, but it was the postpartum for me, like my physical recovery, my mental, I remember coming home from a meeting with a lactation consultant and just start bawling. And my husband's like, what is wrong with you? So like, I just had no idea. And that's when I was like, okay, this is way more than I thought it was. And and when I talk to a lot of people, that's their experience too. They're like, I just had no idea.
Yeah, because the emphasis is on the birth, right? Like you were saying just a bit ago. And I mean, and that was me with sleep, because I wasn't a sleep coach when my oldest was born, and his birth was not how we planned. I mean, none of mine were. I'm not someone who can say my births were the best ever, despite very good healthcare teams. But, that's a story for another day. But I did actually have good postpartum experiences. And I attribute a lot of that to my mom coming and staying with us for an extended period of time. And my mom knows all the things about babies. And so, really, really supportive and really, really actually helpful. I know having your mom come to stay for a long time would not necessarily be helpful for everybody, but my mom is super helpful. But like, I was like, babies wake, they sleep, you feed them, whatever, like no safe sleep and you're good. And then I was like, what is going on here? Like, what's actually normal? And I feel like that for most people extends so much beyond sleep and feeding. Just like generally, like we aren't around newborns. Most people are not around newborns before they become a parent, or like maybe they held their friend's baby. And so it's just this whole alien concept, not only like, what is your body going to go through? What is your relationship going to go through? And then also what is actually normal versus like completely unrealistic expectations. And I do a lot of that in my newborn sleep class that I teach. I'm talking a lot about like, we got to have realistic expectations. We can't just should and wish our way into a baby sleeping and behaving in a way that isn't actually healthy for babies, to sleep and behave.
Right. Yeah. I think in our culture, I think people want babies to like almost act like adults. Like that they 100%. They eat on a regular schedule, that they start sleeping through the night, really early. Like that's kind of what we expect. And it's not realistic. Their bodies are so immature and they are developing at such a rapid rate. Their sleep patterns are different than adults, but yet that's what we expect. And so it's setting those realistic expectations that will help kind of set us up for more success.
Yeah.
If we prepare for it early.
Yeah. And in some ways that we expect more from them than we do from adults. Like, especially when we think about sleep and feeding, right? This idea that very young babies should be able to go 12 hours all night long sleeping and not eating. And it's like, most adults don't go 12 hours without at least drinking something. Right. Even if you're,
I know, I'm like, I have a water bottle next to my bed.
like, I'm like, even if you're someone who doesn't eat for 12 hours or you do intermittent fasting or whatever dietary pattern you want to follow, you probably drink over the course of 12 hours. And feeds for babies are hydration as well as food. And so I think sometimes we are like, we don't even expect that of ourselves, but we have this expectation.
Right.
So, go ahead.
One thing that I learned, probably not until I was like having my third, was also that babies feed for so many more reasons than just food. And so like they want that skin to skin touch, they want the warmth, they maybe their tummy is not feeling good, like they want to be here, like their environment is like on your chest, skin to skin, that kind of stuff. Like that's
Yes.
like it's so much more than just food and calories and that kind of stuff. You should be using that time to like get to know your baby, build a relationship with your baby, learning about all of the signs that they give you, because that's how they communicate. They can't say words, but they can communicate in other ways.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge thing for me. When I learned that, I was like, okay, that's different, because we're always like, oh, I just fed the baby. Like, why are they hungry again? Well, maybe they're not hungry, but they just want to be close to you.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah. And particularly nursing, right? It is about regulation and that sensory input and comfort. And bottle feeding can be like that. I feel like there are some slightly different dynamics with using like comfort sucking
Right.
with a bottle versus comfort sucking directly nursing.
Right.
And you, of course, can bottle feed with all that same lovely skin to skin and sensory experience and connection. And so that doesn't
Yes.
have to be exclusive to feeding type. But I love that you highlighted that because I talk about it a lot, right? In lactation stuff that like nursing is feeding is a relationship. And for babies, that's such a big way of the way they relate to us. And also we're carrying mammals. So newborns, exactly like you were saying, they want to be on your chest. They want to be close to you. That's literally how we've survived as a species.
Right.
Babies aren't designed to be separate from us. And that's
Yes.
hard in modern culture, but it is the
It
biological
is.
fact.
Right. Yeah. I think it's, with all the baby carriers now and things like that, like I think it's helping us kind of get back to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for a long time there was this expectation of, oh, you can just put baby down in a bassinet or wherever they're sleeping and just expect them to lay there and sleep.
Yep. To chill,
And then a
happy.
lot of people were surprised when they're like, my baby only sleeps when they're on me. And I'm like, that's like their favorite spot. That's
Mm-hmm.
what they know. That's what they're comfortable with.
You're their habitat. Like you are their
Mm-hmm.
natural habitat, especially in those early months when they're really adjusting to being on the outside and the outside world. And that's way different for them. It's a big,
Mm-hmm.
big transition.
Yeah.
So I feel like when we're thinking about what's realistic and what to expect, there's like the baby side of thing. We touched on a few pieces around that. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's like the parent adult side of thing. Do you feel
Right.
like when you're talking with parents, sort of sticking with the baby side of things for just a bit longer? I know my big things with newborns are, right, that their sleep is really irregular, that they haven't yet sorted their days from nights. They don't have an established circadian rhythm in the fourth trimester, and that there's a lot of fluidity and variation because they're just so immature. And same with feeding, right? We're going to have frequent feeds across day and night, and that is important and healthy. And we shouldn't be trying to force babies into these long, deep sleep stretches or long stretches without feeds young because they are just not developmentally ready for that. Yeah. And so I know those
Mm-hmm.
are things that I am always talking about. What
Yeah.
are some of the things that you are always talking about around like baby care expectations or baby behavior expectations?
Something that comes up, it sounds kind of silly, but something a lot of people say to me is all the noises that babies make. Like
Yes. Oh my
that
goodness.
they grunt a lot, their breathing patterns can be kind of funky. Like, and so then they're like, are they breathing okay? Kind of
Yeah.
those things. And so like I've heard lots of moms and dads will say, like, I wake up because I hear the baby making all these sounds. And I'm like, that doesn't necessarily mean that baby's waking up.
Yes.
It goes
Yes.
back to their nervous system is very immature. And so
Hmm.
that's part of that development. So that's something that a lot of people mention, and they always ask me about that
I love
is
that. Yes.
all the noises that they make, their reflexes, they have those startle reflexes. Those are very popular things that people ask about. One thing I always tell new parents is I was like, you will never think you will ever care so much about poop in your life until you have a baby.
Yes. Oh my God. We were just actually talking about this yesterday. I forget why. Oh, yes. My dog ate a soft rubber dog brush
Oh,
that I had set out
uh-huh.
to dry. I gave her a bath. I put her in the backyard and then I washed the brush and I put it in and she ate half of it. And so we were talking
Oh
about like
no.
watching her poop for dog
Yep.
brush to come out, or like is she having regular bowel movements, or do we need to take her to the vet? And
Mm-hmm.
my 11-year-old was like, why are we talking about poop again? I'm like,
Right.
kids and dogs, right? Kids and
Yes.
pets, babies and pets, you
Yep.
will talk about poop. and elimination
Yep.
more than you ever think you will at any other
Yeah, you'd
time.
never think you'd care about what color it is and the consistency and how often and all those things. So I think knowing what is normal for that, like diaper output, how many wet and
Yeah.
poopy diapers they should have depending on their age, and things like that, especially in those first couple of weeks. I think those are probably the three most things that people ask me about.
Yeah, and I love that we already talked about that closeness and skin to skin
Mm-hmm.
and connection, because it's so fundamental to learning their cues, to learning their feeding patterns, to having
Mm-hmm.
a good feeding relationship, to restful sleep in a lot of cases. And so
Yep.
really holding that as sacred. I was talking with a mom the other week, maybe it was a month ago or so. Anyway, and she was talking about how she felt bad taking her baby away from baby's grandma who was visiting to help. And I'm just like, oh no, 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 this baby's 3 weeks old. Like, yes, it's lovely that your mother-in-law wants to snuggle your baby, right? And that she's
Mm-hmm.
here to help, but
Yep.
you're 3 weeks postpartum and having feeding challenges. You need that baby on your chest as much as you want
Mm-hmm.
that baby on your chest. And if you want to break, of course, hand him off to your partner, hand him
Right.
off to, grandma. But like, grandma's not entitled to more baby snuggles than the parent who just gave birth and
Yes.
is trying to get
Yep.
to know their baby and establish feeding and all these different things. And it's just, I don't, I don't think that this mom was the only one thinking like this, right? Feeling bad
Right.
about asking for their baby back and having
Yeah.
that time away from
I
family
think
members.
I think early parenthood is when, especially with your first, I think that is when a lot of people start learning how to set boundaries with like extended family,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's when it's like they're like, I'm afraid to tell them no, and I'm like, you're allowed to say no. Like, you're allowed to set those boundaries. You can decide who you want in your home and who you don't. And yeah, especially like you said, like if you're having feeding troubles and you're working through that kind of stuff, like a lot of times it's easier to not have an audience around you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a huge part of postpartum, is like figuring out what you need and then having the team around you, whoever that is, whether that's family, whether it's a postpartum doula, whether, an IBCLC, whatever those people are that you need in your space to help support you, of creating that team. And
Yeah.
it's okay to say no to very well-meaning friends and family. Like, and it's just going to be for a short period of time. It's not like you're saying, no, you can't ever see or hold my baby. It's like, let us have this time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a time that you can't get back. Like, so many people say that they wish they would have spent more time just resting and holding their baby and getting to know their baby instead of the rush around of having like tons of family and friends around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, stress interferes with bonding, it interferes with your
Mm-hmm.
healing, it
Yeah.
interferes with lactation, and
Yep.
holding your baby and snuggling with them, relaxing them, supports lactation. It boosts prolactin and oxytocin and helps you
Mm-hmm.
bond with your baby. And so we really, I think, well, I mean, I hang out with way too many doulas. So I
Right.
hear us talk about oxytocin a lot when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
birth and, a safe and relaxing environment. But that's what we need postpartum. That's what we need in the fourth trimester, so
Yep.
much as well for the reasons to allow bonding. And if you're nursing, to allow like, or pumping, right, to
Mm-hmm.
allow the lactation process to have the environment that it needs to
Yep.
function optimally.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. We don't talk about oxytocin enough postpartum.
Yeah. And
And I
stress
think that
inhibits
can,
oxytocin, right? They're like,
yeah.
you
And I
can't.
think that can be a big player for like for both partners. Because that's like, I'm like, oh man, that's like dawning on me, because I'm like, there's so many changes to like the postpartum relationship
Mhm.
between partners that I'm like, oh, like if all the oxytocin's there, then hopefully that will be better. They'll still be able to spend some time together and connect. And um, yeah, I love that. I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to write that down.
But I think for me, that was one of the coolest things that I learned when I realized that like cortisol and oxytocin are kind of, you have one high or the other high, right? You can't have
Right.
both at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yep.
Um, and it's like obvious when you don't think about it from a hormonal standpoint, when you're like, okay, obviously I can't be stressed and connected, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but we think about it about bonding and feeding and just falling in love with your baby.
Yeah.
It's so powerful, and yet it's really simple, you know. Not and having the support to process things that are hard that could create stress, right? Because people have challenges in
Yes.
their feeding journey. They have, births that
Hmm.
don't go to plan,
Right.
things that are legitimately stressful that we can't always avoid, but support. So I
Hmm.
want to hear, since you spent a lot of time, what do you feel like we were just talking about the relationship piece, and then I also want to touch a little bit on like the birthing parent and like what they might
Hmm.
experience and how they might support themselves.
Can we start with that first?
Yes, absolutely.
Kind
That's
of.
probably a more
So
logical space
yeah.
to start.
So I kind of always break it down into that three. So what to expect, like physically, mentally, and emotionally,
I love
because
that.
you're affected in all three areas. Because I think most people think about the physical recovery first. They think, well, maybe what if I had stitches, or if you did have a cesarean, what does that recovery look like? What if I'm sore? If you are nursing, like, are you experiencing engorgement? So there's lots of like physically things going on with your body. And so that's like, have you heard of like that 5-5-5 rule?
Yes. But
So it's
explain it for
like,
the listeners.
yes. So they say to spend 5 days in bed, and then kind of 5 days on the bed or like around the bed. And then 5 days more, just kind of maybe go to the couch, but you're still kind of staying home. You're not really going out. You're not doing a ton of stuff. Well, I understand that that can be hard. I totally get that. Like, we lead busy lives, and
Yes.
when we are, maybe you're going to see a lactation consultant, or you're going to go see your provider or the pediatrician or something. I think if we could try to get as much rest as possible, I mean, that's the first thing for any physical recovery.
Yeah.
Even think of any time that we're sick or something like that. We're all like, yeah, we just need to rest, but we don't rest postpartum.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think that that's the first thing, is being able to set up whatever we need so that we can rest as much as possible.
And just on
Um,
that point, before you go to your next point, like I've heard that even if you feel really good, like
mhm.
that rest is still an investment, right? Or it can
Yes.
kind of come back and bite you in the butt later on.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah,
if
that's
you
kind of
push through,
right where
even
I
if
was
you're feeling
going.
great. Oh, sorry, yes,
Yes.
go with
Yeah,
that.
no, you're good. Yeah, like so many people, they're like, oh, I feel fine. Especially if you have been resting, they're like, I'm actually feeling pretty good. Usually, like if I'm their postpartum doula, I'm like, okay, then we're going to rest some more. Because what they tend to do is they're like, well, I'm going to go out and go see some friends. And like, we're just going to get out of the house, which I think can be helpful, because you can kind of get, like if you're in your house all the time for that long, like you want to get some sunshine. I get it. But then they come back and they're like, okay, that was too much.
Hmm.
They're like that. They're like, I feel like I've been hit by a truck now. Their bleeding might increase, because that's very common if you start doing too much physically, that your postpartum bleeding will increase. And so it's like, I think get out and get some sunshine if you need to, but be very, very careful. Be very thoughtful about that. And so just set yourself up. So again, whether that's with family and friends helping with chores while you hold the baby, or whether that's whatever that looks like to you to help you get rest, whether that's having meals brought in, so that you're not doing any cooking, whatever that looks like, set yourself up for success there, because I think that's the beginning,
Yeah,
is
and
rest.
rest is so important. Like I hear that like when people, not everybody likes to sleep when the baby sleeps piece of advice
Mm-hmm.
to pick up extra
Mm-hmm.
sleep. And I think sometimes we forget that like just restfully being awake and interacting with our baby is really restorative. Just,
Mm-hmm.
you know, sleep
Yep.
whenever you want to sleep, but also just resting and relaxing. I was one of those people that needed to get outside. I found getting some sunlight really
Yes.
helpful. And also, somebody who, with my first baby, it was like, when can I get back to running? When can I start
Mm-hmm.
running again? Like, and I mean, did, listen to my body, but objectively on paper, probably did more than I should, sooner
Oh,
than I
I'm totally
should.
guilty too. I remember with my first, I was like, oh, I feel pretty good today. And then by the end of the day, I was like, I did way too much today. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
But across different postpartum experiences, it can be really, really different. And like, I laugh at myself because my easiest postpartum was my first, and he was a C-section. And like, I bounced back in like the most easiest way. And, you know, it's like, it's funny that the way your body responds just to different experiences and different points in your life. And it's not always as clear cut as your birth goes this way and your postpartum is gonna,
Right.
follow a straight line. Like
Yeah, that's a good point.
I ran a marathon 8 months after my first was born. And I'd been run a couple marathons in the years leading up to getting pregnant with him. But that's me being a crazy runner. Yes, I know everybody should not
Hey,
do
that's
that.
okay.
But I did bounce back really, really quickly and had good guidance from my care providers. Like, here's how you know what's too much. And so while that would not be what I would choose maybe to do now with what I now know about like pelvic ligament recovery and all
Right.
that kind of stuff, I also know like finding ways to get pieces of what you want to get back to in a safe way is really helpful. Like,
Yes.
instead of saying like you should be inside for 40 days or whatever,
Right.
being like, go for gentle walks, right?
Yes.
Like,
that's why I'm like, even just walk around the block,
yeah,
and just take it slow.
fresh
Don't push
air.
yourself. Cause yeah, I think fresh air and sunshine and putting your feet in the grass are so healing too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's finding that balance of not doing too much, but still getting what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. So physical.
Okay. So there's a physical side. I think the mental and emotional, a lot of people think they just kind of go together. And I think a lot of us it's becoming more popular to talk about like postpartum depression and anxiety. But I even like to tackle like just the first couple of weeks and the baby blues. And because again, I had no idea what to expect. Nobody ever told me about the baby blues. My problem is I missed the last class of my birth class because I had my baby that day that we were supposed to go to our last class. He surprised us a week early, but so I just had like no expectation that I would be, on a roller coaster with my emotions. And I think a lot of people don't realize how drastic the dip in the hormones is immediately, literally immediately after birth, that your hormones just immediately start to change. And I think when you pair that with the mental part of, realizing I am now 100% responsible for this tiny infant who I have to do everything for. And then, with like the lack of sleep. And I think if you throw feeding challenges on top of that, I think it's that overwhelm that is what starts to hit people at about 3 or 4 days, maybe 5 days postpartum. I think it hits both partners. And so just knowing to expect that like you might feel really great now mentally and emotionally, and then the next day you might feel totally down at the bottom and you're crying and you're like, I don't know why I'm crying. So knowing that is very normal, I think is part of that. Because I think if somebody just told me that's a normal part of it, it's okay, and here's some tools to help you get through that. And I think for partners knowing that that's normal too, because like I said, my husband was kind of like, what is going on? Like, what's wrong with you? He's like, you've never acted this way before. And so knowing that this is a part of that process is like, that's just, a lot of people are like, just, it's fine. I'll be fine.
Yeah.
I can get through this few days.
Like, it's scary if you don't know why all of a sudden your emotions are out of control or your partner's emotions are out of control. Like, that can be really stressful.
Yeah. And it can be scary.
Yeah.
Yep.
I kind of wonder if we actually had the more like integrated multi-generational support that you're supposed to have in postpartum, how that would change the roller coaster of emotions, right? Because some of it is absolutely that drop in hormones and shifts and things like that. And if we all entered postpartum period with really knowing that it's normal to be weepy and all over the place after you have a baby, and also that like so many of the tasks of daily life that take up mental and emotional space are like taken off our hands. That your job is just to figure out baby and take care of yourself instead of like, where are we getting dinner and who's going to walk the dog and how do I not have, my neighbor sticking their nosy self into my business right now. Like, I just wonder how that would be different,
Well, I think we're kind of seeing a resurgence of people who are like kind of wanting to create that, and they're buying like acres of land and putting their houses all there because they realize how beneficial it is to have that support. Because when we like, we all pretty much live in like single family homes, and many of us don't have a lot of family nearby for help. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it would be so different if we all still kind of, had that village or had that support already built in, and we didn't have to, that'd be one less thing we'd have to worry about,
Yeah. And probably for a lot of people, you would have been more closely connected to someone who had a baby before, meaning
Right.
that you're not entering that space for like, oh, I want to check out the baby and like show and tell kind of thing, but like
Yeah.
actually like I'm here to do something helpful for you because I have been through it, or my sister's been through it and I was with her, or what have you, that bring you into that time in a sort of more intimate way, rather than like, oh, I want to see the baby and hear your birth story and then kind of peace out and not actually
Yep.
be, meaningfully helpful.
Yeah. I 100% totally agree with you there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think preparing for that overwhelm in modern society is probably a good thing. Like, what can you do to counterbalance that or ease the load or
Yeah.
keep communication open?
Yeah. I think that's a huge part of it. You've got to think ahead. It's so hard to think like when we're in the middle of it, of going, and I've had so many clients say there, and I'm like, what do you need? And they're like, I don't know. And so that's when you've got to have like people who kind of know, because then I'm like, I have no problem just stepping in and saying, okay, I see a sink full of dishes. Let's get the dishes done. Have you had lunch? Like, do you need a shower? Because everybody, like every mom who's had babies knows that like sometimes even just getting a shower is enough to make you go, oh, wow, I feel like a whole different person.
Yes.
So so having people who can come in and just see the things that need to be done instead of asking, because so many moms are just like, no, I'm good. I can't think of anything that needs to be done. Whereas really there's probably a million things that they might need.
Yeah. And it's easier for you as, I mean, a postpartum doula or you as a friend to come in and say, I'm going to clean up these dishes for you, right? Or whatever, than like to think about, what do I need done? What do I feel comfortable asking you to do?
Right.
Is that okay? Should I feel like I have to have it all together? And hard. We are not brought up in a culture that teaches you how to ask for and accept help very well.
Yes. Yep. And that's hard. I mean, and even I've had to get better at that over the years. I think that's something that most of us, we're not good at. So it's almost like a skill we have to develop, which sounds kind of silly, but that whole like delegating, and being able to say, I need somebody to do this, can be really hard for some people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yep.
So thinking about the dynamics, like the relationship dynamics in the postpartum period, I'd love to just touch a little bit about that, because I feel like it's a lot, and you're kind of going through your own experiences, and you don't always fully get what your partner is going through.
Yeah. I think it's another aspect that a lot of people don't realize, is that the partner kind of has their whole side of things too. Because when we talk about postpartum, they think about, the person who just gave birth and what they're doing and what they're going through and the baby, but we don't talk about the partner enough. They often are going through their own mental and emotional things. Maybe they have, maybe they're just worried now about like supporting this baby and working, are they getting any time off from work, or are they just going and jumping right back into it? For my first three, my husband was a student. We didn't have any time off. And so for our fourth, I was like, heck yeah, you're taking time off,
Yeah.
So thinking about that kind of stress, and their world is kind of getting thrown up into the air too. They're kind of like, this is totally new. They're probably not getting enough sleep as well. And they're trying to figure out, well, okay, I'm not feeding this baby, but what can I do? They want to be supportive, but a lot of times they're not sure how. And so they can kind of be, I'm thinking like standoffish, but not really, but they're just unsure. And so I think helping partners to realize like interact with the baby, do these things, helping with diapers. A lot of people think that's like, no big deal, but I'm like, for partners to be actively involved in diapers, in doing that skin to skin. That's huge for partners too, for their bonding with the baby.
I don't know if you see this a lot, but I see a lot this idea that, especially with nursing parents, like baby just wants to nurse with their nursing
Mm-hmm.
parent, and then like, what am I supposed to do? And it's like
Right.
we don't do a good enough job with parents in that situation with the partner in being like, there are so many things you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sure, if you both want to give the baby a bottle so that both parents can feed some, like, absolutely. It
Sure.
tends to create more work, in my
Right.
opinion. But like,
Yes.
that work is relative, right? If that still feels better for you, of course, I don't mean that like there's more work in a judgmental way, but like, it does create more work. So it's not always actually a helpful thing. But like, there's so many ways. This was really on my radar actually with my first, because at the time I was working as a public health analyst on as a project officer on a grant program that was designed to support improve birth outcomes and reduce infant mortality. And we got some free continuing ed workshop on fatherhood involvement and talked a lot about like maternal gatekeeping and how do we
Mm-hmm.
help dads. And I mean, it was very heterosexually presented. So that's the language here.
Right.
Like, how do we help dads or partners who are not the birthing parent, who are not like the feeding parent, the body feeding parent? How do we help them be more
Mm-hmm.
involved? How do we sometimes get in the way? How do we help them feel competent when we often have very uneven amounts of hands-on baby care time
Right.
because of
Right.
our lack of good parental leave? And so it was really interesting. And I feel like I was very lucky that I watched that when I was pregnant with my oldest. And it really stuck with me. And there's so many things, like you were saying, baby wearing and skin to skin, like partners need a bond. That's such a
Oh,
powerful
the
thing.
studies on skin to skin and partners is huge.
Yes.
Like that is such an important thing for them to do as well. And especially I think it said within the 24 hours, like the first 24 hours after baby is born, for them to do skin to skin as well. And I think it said for like 30 minutes.
Mm,
And when we talk about skin to skin, because a lot of people think it's just like, oh, it's just the first couple of weeks after birth. But I'm like, that should be going on for months.
yeah.
Like, because again, that's baby's environment. You said habitat. I love that word. Like, that's what they love. That's what they know. Like, and my oldest still like this spot right here, like is his favorite thing. Anytime that he's like overstimulated or tired or just needs like anything extra, like his hand goes right here,
Yeah.
and so like that skin to skin contact is huge
Yeah.
for
My
both parts.
6-year-old will like want to lift up her shirt and lift up my shirt and be like belly to belly. Like she wants to kind of
Oh,
snuggle in
mm-hmm.
and get that,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
she'll like
it's
take my
huge.
whole arm and like wrap herself around it. Like, she just
Mm-hmm.
wants that skin to skin
Yep.
connection.
Yeah, I loved what you're talking about. I How do I word this? I think it's important for partners to just get in there and do like and try,
Yes.
because what you do with your baby is going to be different than the other parent.
Yes.
And I remember with my first, pretty much telling my husband he was wrong in the way he was doing it. And I look back at that and I'm like, oh my goodness. I was like, what was I thinking? And because it really affected like his relationship with him. And I was just like, oh, I really screwed up there.
Yeah.
And so
Oh,
I think and that can be really hard because it's like, we have our way of doing it, but their way is going to be different. And that's okay. And they're going to have different ways that they interact with the baby, or different, like they might change the diaper a little bit differently or get them dressed a little
mhm.
bit differently. And that's okay. Like recognizing that that's 100% okay. And just so sometimes I just tell my clients, I'm like, just get in there and start interacting with your baby, talk to your baby, get to know them. I think that that's part of it. It's just like because a lot of it's trial and error, figuring
Yeah.
out what works for you.
Absolutely. And the way baby responds to one parent is going to be different than they respond to
Mm-hmm.
another parent. So even like comforting
Yes.
things, like how baby reacts is going to be really different. And so what works, maybe one parent is the nursing parent and they are nursing, and baby likes when they sway a certain way, but then, their other
Mm-hmm.
parent, they like when they hold them up in their shoulder in a certain way and hum in a certain way. So, I mean, there's just
Yep.
different dynamics in the way baby responds, as well as just the way you as a parent do think that, oh my God, I mean, you're totally not the only parent, as I'm sure you know, who's told their partner they're
Right.
wrong in early
Right.
parenting and then been like, ooh, cringe.
I think it was finally after my second that I was like, oh, that's really not good. I was like, that's not helpful at all. So,
My husband, like his primary things when our kids were little was bath time.
mhm.
And he changed more diapers than I did, for sure, except for obviously when I was the one home
Right.
with baby. And he was
Yep.
not. But he did a lot of baby wearing, but he was primary bath duty to the point that I realized when my daughter was like maybe 13 months that I had not actually given her a bath at all. It had only been my husband giving her a bath. And I went to
Mhm.
go give her a bath and she was like, "You can't give me a bath." Like you like, "Yo, girl, I've been giving babies baths before I even had kids. Like, I
Uh-huh.
can give you a
That's
bath."
funny.
But she was like, "Only daddy." I'm like, "Oh my God, what did we do here?" But
Yeah. I know lots
you
of
know.
I've had lots of dads that it's bedtime. Their thing is like bedtime and reading a bedtime story, you know? So like
Oh,
you can kind
yeah.
of create those routines for your kids. And yeah, I think it's so important for them to just, like I said, just jump in and figure it out. You will. You're gonna feel unsure about it, and but generally you figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, that's just so much of parenting, isn't it? Every new phase, you're going to feel unsure about it. You're
Yes.
going to jump in there and do some trial and error, and you're going to figure it out. And then you're going to be in a new phase, and you're like, now what?
That's how I feel right now with teenagers. So
Yes, my oldest is 11, and the tween years. Whew.
yes, my oldest is 14.
Oh, that's
And
even scarier.
yeah, it's we're making it. We're surviving. But it is like people ask me like, how do you do it? They're like, you do all these things. And I'm like, honestly, it's a day at a time. And some days go really well, and other days just are really hard. And we're just constantly like figuring it out.
Yeah. I feel like wrapping your brain around those principles somewhere in the babyhood time can
Mm-hmm.
be really, really powerful because it is like it gets easier in some ways. Like the needs shift as you
Right.
parent
Mm-hmm.
across different phases. But there's never a point when you're like, I've totally got this. I've got it all figured out. Like
Right.
it's easy, you know? It's
Mm-hmm.
like there's always something new coming up. It just happens so constantly and quickly, I feel like, in
Yeah.
the first
Yeah. I
year.
think being flexible as a parent is like the key to surviving. I had one friend, she explains it to me because she's got kids that are kind of my kids age, but she also has older kids. She's got an adult child now, and well, they're not a child anymore, but she has adult children. And so she's like, it's that their needs change. Like when they're little, they need you more physically. You're doing more physical things with them. You're feeding them. You're
Mhm.
playing with them. But then as they get older, it's more shifts to a mental, emotional of like really kind of guiding them so they can make their own decisions and things like that. And I'm like, oh, that's so true.
That is so true. That is
So
so, so, so
yeah,
true.
yeah.
And I
Parenting's just
imagine,
a wild ride.
yeah, and I imagine then stepping back and giving them that space to make mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
more
Yep.
and more as they grow.
Yep.
Ooh, parenting is hard, y'all.
It
It
is
is
just a
wild.
bit.
So I started thinking as we wrap things up, though I feel like we could keep talking forever. If you're thinking about, supporting yourself in the fourth trimester, whether that's from the place of planning when you're pregnant, or like, a parent listening to this right in the middle of it, do you feel like there's any like kind of overarching messages we haven't touched on or you want to circle back to and just make sure we leave parents with to think about?
I mean, it sounds kind of simple, but I just tell parents like you can do this. You are capable of
Mm.
doing this. So many new parents just feel completely inadequate and they feel like they're not doing a good enough job, because they're asked questions like, do you have a good baby? Is your baby sleeping?
Ooh,
Things like that.
cringe.
And you are a good parent. The fact that you care that you're a good parent is, that I'm like, you can do this. You're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. I always use the phrase, don't quit on a bad day. Don't
Mhm.
just like throw everything out the window just because you had a bad day. Babies are human. They're going to have a bad day too.
Mhm.
So I just have those affirmations in your head of I can do this. I can take care of this tiny infant. I'm a capable adult. So,
Yeah, and being overwhelmed, right? That doesn't negate any of what you just said. Like
right.
that's just part
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah, that's just part of the process. Yeah.
I love that. Love that. Holly, this has been awesome. Let's sort of wrap up with telling folks where they can find you. And of course, I'll link to everything in the show notes.
So if you just search for Birth Boot Camp, we will pop up everywhere. So our website's just birthbootcamp.com, and then it's, Facebook, Instagram, all the places. It's just look up Birth Boot Camp and you'll find us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
And thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.